Alright, so you are going to take your diagram of your creature that you have created with all its labels and everything, and what you're going to do is you're going to take a white piece of paper and you're going to trace aspects of your creature. So eventually we're going to paint this paper, one with warm color, and you're going to get another one and paint it with cool colors, okay? So I want you to think, you have to kind of pre-plan what parts of your creature do you want to be warm colors and what parts do you want to be cool. So on mine, I think I want the body to be cool, and I think I want the wings to be warm, and the feet to be warm, and the tail to be cool. So I have a plan here. So what you're going to do is you are going to trace those parts. So let's say this is my cool colored paper. So I'm just going to remind myself this is cool, so I wrote the word cool up here. And you want to trace those parts of the body of your creature that you want to paint with cool colors, okay? And you want to use your paper. So if you notice, if I lift this up, I scooch this all the way to the end because now I have way more paper to trace other things with. If I put this right in the center of the paper, I wouldn't have much space, okay? Because I know I need the body and the tail. So I'm going to scooch it over and I'm going to trace the tail. Okay, and then I also want the bottom parts of my wings to be with cool colors. Okay, so what this looks like, it doesn't look like much, but these are like little puzzle pieces we will cut out and we will put together to create our piece. So now I'm going to get my other paper. This is going to be my warm colored paper. And I'm going to trace those other things here. So I need to do the wings. They're going to take up a lot of space, so I want to try to get as close to the edge as possible, not in the middle. Okay, so here are my pieces. Now what I would do, make sure your lines are pretty heavy because we are going to paint over this. They don't have to be super, super dark, but make sure you're going to be able to see them under the paint, okay? So I will show you how to paint the paper next, and then we'll get going. Okay, so we are going to begin the painting process. So up here I wrote warm colors, so I'm going to use 3 warm colors, and if they are neighbors with each other on the color wheel, they are called analogous colors. So I'm choosing 3 warm, and we're going to use watercolor paint, and we're going to use the wet on wet technique. So with watercolor paint, you need a brush that is appropriate for watercolors. You want soft hair, and you need a bucket of water. So the way we do wet on wet technique is your paint has to be wet, your brush has to be wet, and your paper has to be wet. So everything is wet. That's why it's called a wet on wet. So before I get any paint on my brush, I'm just going to dip it in the water, and I'm going to put some water here on the paper. And maybe I'll just do half the paper full of water. Now, the key with wet on wet is you just don't want it to get too wet, because then your paper's going to start to fall apart and the paint's going to be too runny. So here I did the top portion of my paper wet. And I'm doing warm colors, so I'm going to go to my watercolor, and I'm going to start with yellow, since yellow is my lightest, and I'm going to get that color yellow nice and wet. So now I have wet paint, wet paper. You put it on, and you can see how that started to spread? If you did not have that paper wet, this paint wouldn't be able to move in the way that it does. So very gently, I'm just going to put some yellow in some places and let it move on its own. Okay, then I'm going to rinse, and I'm going to get a yellow-orange, because that is the color next to it on the color wheel. So I'm doing analogous warm colors, colors that are neighbors, and I'm going to drop in some orange here into the areas that didn't get hit with yellow. Now you can tell I keep going back to my water sometimes. I do that because sometimes If the paper feels a little too dry, like, because water dries pretty quick, I just like to get it a little wet again. So I let everything spread into each other. Now I'm going to rinse my brush, and I'm going to pick orange. This is more of a red orange, I think. There we go. See, look at that spread. That's so fun. Alright, so now I did the top half of my paper, so I'm going to do the bottom half. So I rinsed my brush nice and clean. Now I'm getting the bottom half wet, and you can see some of that paint's already starting to spread down. When there is water, the paint wants to move. And I'm just going to do that same process. What I want you to notice is how my entire paper is covered with paint. I did not just paint my shapes. I painted the whole paper. I want you guys to paint the whole paper as well. So now while it is wet, we're going to take some salt and we're going to sprinkle salt all over it. The salt is going to absorb some of that water and it's going to leave a nice pretty effect. But this can only happen when you're all finished painting. Don't do this and then put your paintbrush on top of the salt, because then the salt won't work. So we do this when we're ready to stop. And with the salt, I want you to think of it more like fairy dust. Just give it a sprinkle. You don't need to put tons of it on there, just a little sprinkle. And this is the wet on wet technique. I use my analogous warm colors, and I'm going to put this on the drying rack to dry. Hold it with 2 hands, otherwise the paint can slide down, and we don't want that. We want it to be nice and pretty. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to my cool colored paper, and I'm going to do that same process, the wet on wet technique, except this time I'm going to be using cool colors instead of warm. Okay, so my paper has dried, and I have all of my pieces now traced on it, ready to cut out. So I'm going to keep my diagram in front of me so I can continue to reference it as I work. Alright, so I'm just going to begin cutting out my shapes. And then we got to puzzle our creature together. Okay, so you have to pay attention to what's your scraps versus what's actually going to be used for your creature. Okay, so I'm going to actually just keep my scraps to the side because maybe I might need them, so I don't want to recycle them just yet. But so here's everything that I have to puzzle together. So now I'm going to look at my drawing, and I'm going to begin. Okay, so I know the body is going to come first. And I should probably glue on the legs underneath. Now I'm just going to put a little dot of glue at the top. And I'm going to lift up my body and put it underneath, like that. Okay, and next is the tail, so I'm just going to put some glue right here around where the head would be. I'm going to lift that up. Okay, next come the wings. For the bottom part of the wings, I'm just going to put a little bit of glue on the side and here where it's going to touch the body, and I'm going to lift it up. So you're not putting glue everywhere. You're kind of just putting it where you know it's going to touch. So you kind of have to have a little bit of a plan there. Okay, so here's the idea. Now, if on mine I have some decorations on the wings, so if I wanted to, I can use my extra paper and I can add those decorations. If you don't have any extra paper to do that kind of stuff, that's okay. It's just, this is kind of what I have, so I kind of want to play with that. Okay, so right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pencil and I'm going to draw my face. And I'm doing it with a pencil first because you can't erase with a Sharpie. So I'm going to do it with pencil. In case I make a mistake, I can always just erase it. And I'm looking off my reference paper. So all the details that I could not make with paper, I'm now putting in with the lines. Okay, and then you want to take a Sharpie and go over those marks. Okay, now I'm actually outlining where I collaged my paper in here because I think it needs a bold outline. It's getting a little lost. So I'm going around the edges. Okay, so here is my original character creature design that I have collaged out of paper. We've done warm and cool colors, we've used watercolor wet on wet technique, and we've used the salt on watercolor technique, and now I've created this awesome creature. So we still aren't done with the assignment, but at least this part is finished. Okay, so now I'm going to begin drawing the background. So you just kind of want to think of the environment you want your creature to be living in and begin drawing it. And we're going to do this part with markers or crayons, so we're going to switch our media. Okay, so I'm going to draw with a pencil first, and I'm just going to get right to it, creating my background. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm going to outline things with marker. So I'm not going to use Sharpie this time. So I'm just using washable marker, and this is going to give me my heavier outlines. So I made a little waterfall here, so that's what I'm outlining right now. I want my creature to live kind of in the forest, so my creature's hanging out in the forest. I'm going to use a bunch of different greens to do all the greenery. So now that I've outlined everything with the washable marker, I'm going to go back and erase my pencil marks, just like I would if I were using Sharpie. And then I'm going to use crayon to color all of this in. So what I'm getting is a nice heavy outline with that washable marker, and then the inside's going to be a little lighter, so we're combining two media and making them look super nice together. This kind of shows a little bit of value where you're getting darks and lights a little bit. So what I've done here is I've taken my creature and I've put a frame of glue around the whole thing and I glued it onto my background drawing, and now my artwork is all complete. Mixed media, paint, salt, crayon, and marker, and our original design.